Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again tonight with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these videos. I know they've been a bit inconsistent, and there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I've been out of town continuously over this past month or so it's been kind of tough to consistently get these out, but also I've kind of talked about basically every team, and we know where most squads stand, but with the trade deadline does come some new things to discuss, so as long as the All-Star break isn't going on, which is right around the corner, I'm going to try and get these videos out more consistently, so make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos, and let's go ahead and get right into it. Of course, as you can probably tell from the title and thumbnail of this video, we first are going to focus on the Chicago Bulls versus the Indiana Pacers, which isn't the most assuming game on the schedule. Both of these teams have been pretty mediocre so far this season, but the Bulls in particular have been really annoying. The Pacers weren't really supposed to be great this year. Tyrese Halliburton did a great job of propelling them earlier on in the year, and due to his injury and a couple other things, they've kind of fallen off a bit, and I'm still not sure whether or not they're going to be a play-in team or a lottery squad, but either way, the Pacers are in a really good spot. As for Chicago, that's not exactly the case. They came into the season with much loftier expectations after last year having a really surprisingly great year before injuries really derailed them, and they did bow out in the playoffs pretty unceremoniously to the Milwaukee Bucks, who are just a far better squad, but they did still have playoff aspirations, or at least they thought they would be a solid play-in team. However, that's not been the case so far, as their season has been pretty disappointing, but the trade deadline finally came around to maybe fix things. They had an opportunity to make a decision and go one way or the other. They could either commit to this thing even more, which I thought would have been a terrible idea, and just, bring in a couple more pieces to try and win, or they could go ahead and completely blow this thing up, which is the route I would have loved to see them go, where they trade Zach LaVine, they trade DeMar DeRozan, they trade an Alex Caruso, at the very minimum trading a guy like him and some of their other role players to just kind of blow this thing up, even if they don't trade their stars till the offseason itself. But instead, the Chicago Bulls made no decisions. They stood exactly in the middle, making not a single move, one of the very few teams to do so, and everybody's still on the roster because according to GM Arturas Karnisovas, he said that they looked at their options, and with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving leaving the Eastern Conference, they felt that the conference was a bit more wide open in terms of playoff spots, but also they just felt that this squad that they had right here after evaluating all their options was the best group to go ahead and win, and you and I both know that is not the case. There had to be something out there on the market, but instead they just stood pat. And I think overall this game against the Pacers is kind of encapsulating what has gone on for this first half of the Chicago Bulls season. They started off really well. They were up 39-15 after the first quarter, 24 points. It was a massive lead for them, and it looked like Chicago was going to be able to stop the bleeding of this recent stretch. Prior to this game, they were on a 4-game losing streak, and it seemed like they were poised to go ahead and break that, head into the All-Star break with a win. Even if it hasn't been a great season so far, at least there's a positive to take into the break itself. But no, instead they decided to lose the next two quarters by a combination of 20 points. Buddy Hield was torching them in particular. There's nothing they could do to stop him, and then all of a sudden they're almost tied heading into the fourth, and by the end of the fourth quarter the Pacers are on top as the Bulls continue to collapse down the stretch. Zach LaVine had a solid game with 35 points, 11 rebounds, and 7 assists, which statistically looks great, but down the stretch he made some really bad decisions, especially in crunch time. He was taking some ill-advised shots, and it kind of looked like he was like, okay, I'm going to take over and play hero ball, which doesn't really work in the NBA typically, and so the Bulls end up falling to the Pacers by 4 points, despite leading by 24 at the end of the first quarter, and leading for most of the game. At the end, they just can't put things together and fall apart, which has been a consistent theme. The Bulls are unable to close games. They fall apart because they're just not a very good squad, and I'm sure some people are going to say, oh, they didn't have DeMar DeRozan in this game. It doesn't matter. The Pacers have not been very good recently, and if you're a team like the Bulls who, according to the GM, see themselves as having the best squad possible with what they've got to compete for a spot in the play-in tournament, especially against the Pacers, who are one of the teams that you are most competing with, you've got to win this game. This is one that they should have been able to come out on top of, especially when you consider the lead they had at the beginning of the game. They've still got Zach LaVine. They've still got Nikola Vucevic. They still have some solid players. Kobe White had a great game in this one. He had, I believe, 25 points, but they weren't able to make things happen. They collapsed on the stretch, and overall, the Bulls just continue to make me frustrated. As I mentioned earlier, with this loss, they've now lost 5 straight games heading into the All-Star break, and some of them were against good squads like the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Memphis Grizzlies, but the other 3 were against pretty bad teams that they should beat if they want to be competitive. One of them was against the Brooklyn Nets, who didn't have any of their new acquisitions. No Mikal Bridges, no Cam Johnson, no, I believe, still Dorian Finney-Smith, although he might have been there. Had absolutely no answer, so they lose that one. They lost to the Orlando Magic, and then tonight to the Indiana Pacers. 3 teams that, if they want to be competing for a play-in spot and push for the playoffs, they should be beating these squads. And now, at the All-Star break, they're 6 games under 500. They're not even even in a play-in spot at the moment. They didn't try and buy at the deadline, which to be honest, I'm very glad that they didn't, because that would have been a complete disaster, because this roster is nowhere near a championship contender. But they also didn't sell, which, like I said, is a direction that I really wish that they went for. I understand you kind of feel like you can still compete for a play-in spot, but even if you make the playoffs through the play-in, you've got no shot at winning a championship, and it's kind of just a wasted season overall when you could have dealt Zach LaVine, you could have dealt DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic really started to go in on this new era, rebuild things, give Patrick Williams half a season to run the offense and see what he can do. If you want to go even smaller, you probably could have just traded like an Alex Caruso, who would have been very valuable to a contender, probably like a Golden State Warriors. Maybe you could have gotten a first-round pick. Maybe you could have gotten a young player to bring into the fold of things. You could have traded like a Javonte Green, who's probably decently valuable. A Kobe White, if you want to move on from him, who doesn't seem like he's super long for Chicago, who, like I said, had a great game tonight. I'm sure a number of contenders would have loved him as a shot creator off their bench. There are pieces on this roster that are valuable, but rather than committing to a rebuild, dealing some of those pieces, and sure, they don't have their first-round pick unless it lands in the top 4, but even still, I think it's better to go ahead and commit to a direction rather than just kind of hanging out in limbo the way that the Bulls are right now. Additionally, there have been some rumors of some internal issues amongst guys in the franchise. For example, Zach LaVine has reportedly been butting heads with Billy Donovan and the front office. Now, I don't know exactly what the extent of that is or how true those reports are, but it's a rumor that's been circling for a bit at this point. And when you look at Zach LaVine's body language, the way that he talks in some post-game interviews, for example, he got benched down the stretch one game earlier this season, and he had a lot of comments to say about how I'm a star player, I don't care if I was playing bad, I should be in those moments, which you can make an argument for, but even still, just making comments like that publicly kind of lead me to believe that this isn't exactly roses over there in Chicago. It doesn't seem like things are going fantastically, so that's an issue. Billy Donovan himself, even, not a great coach. He just hasn't done a great job in Chicago. The Bulls gave him an extension this past offseason without telling anybody after, sure, they had a great run at the beginning of the year, but by the end of it, it was kind of clear that the Bulls weren't exactly championship contenders. However, they still gave him that contract. And overall, it just seems like Bulls fans and the Bulls themselves are uninterested. I've talked to a couple of Bulls fans. My guy Rusty Buckets in particular has told me that he's basically over this season. He doesn't really care. I know Kenny, shout out to him, also my guy, King of the Fourth Quarter, has said too, he's not super invested in the season anymore. He's kind of just waiting for it all to be over. And if the Bulls had made some decision at the deadline in particular to blow things up, it would have at least been interesting. You see some young players get some more opportunities, like a Patrick Williams and anybody else that you bring in. You have a future to look forward to. Instead, the Bulls continue to sit in limbo, continue to be mediocre. We don't know if they make the play-in tournament. We don't know if they make the playoffs, even if they make the play-in tournament, because they're not the most talented team. I guess they've got an all-star in a DeMar DeRozan, which, shout out to him, he ended up making the All-Star game, and he's done a great job of kind of reviving his career here in Chicago, which I do think is a big plus. But despite that, they're nowhere near championship contention at the moment, regardless of what happened at the first half of last season. They're not nearly a team of that caliber. Despite the front office maybe thinking that they could get back there, it's not going to happen. They should have blown it up at the deadline. Instead, they'll continue to lose here and there and be a mediocre purgatory team for the rest of the season before they lose their first-round pick to Orlando, and they've got to once again revisit all of these possibilities in the offseason. Now, I do want to say that not all of this is their fault. I do kind of want to shine some light on the Lonzo Ball situation, because when he was playing last season, the Bulls looked far better. Like I said, they were the first seed for a majority of the year, even if they weren't truly a championship contender, and that was in big part due to the play of Lonzo Ball as a connecting piece, a legitimate point guard, a playmaker, a defender, a shooter. He was playing some of the best basketball of his career, but now that knee injury continues to linger, we don't know when he's going to come back and play basketball, or if ever at any point soon. Hopefully that's not the case and that Lonzo is able to come back soon, but there's a lot of question marks around that, and so I do think that is one thing that is out of the Bulls' control. This kind of sent this era into a bit of a spiral, but regardless, it was clear that this team was never a true championship contender. As long as the front office takes to figure that out, you and me probably both know at this point, and they should have blown it up at the trade deadline. They didn't. We'll see what happens in the offseason itself. Moving on to some of the other games, we had the Nets face off against the Miami Heat in a game where Mikal Bridges absolutely stole the show. He had a 45-point outing, which is absolutely his career high. He had 8 rebounds, he had 5 assists, and he shot over 70% from the field. He's been an incredible piece for them so far. Even before he got traded to Brooklyn, he was having the best stretch of his career, looking like he was being more aggressive, taking more shots off the dribble, and just looking like he could potentially be more than he was made out to be the first few seasons in Phoenix. Not saying that's their fault. I think Mikal just kind of realized exactly what he could be, and in the absence of Devin Booker, who's been dealing with injuries, he decided to kind of step out of his shadow. I don't know if that was a conscious effort from the coaching staff to go ahead and make him do so, but he's been phenomenal here for Brooklyn, and this game is a huge showcase of what he could potentially be down the line, why the Nets apparently passed up on, I think it was 3 or even 4 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges at the trade deadline. They probably see him as one of the cornerstones for their team going forward, and I can understand why. He's still young. He still has a ton of potential, way beyond just a 3-and-D player. He's an Ironman. He never misses a game, and it was super cool. And he is a big reason, alongside some of the other pieces that they got in the KD and Kyrie trades, why I view the Nets as one of the biggest winners of that trade deadline. Meanwhile, for the Heat, they were led by Bam Adebayo in the loss, who had 24 points, 13 rebounds, and 6 assists. He's been phenomenal so far this season, but really, they just continue to lack depth. They're putting out basically anybody that can hoop at this point to make up for some of the injuries that they've had. Although I do want to note that Kevin Love, right before I record this video, did get bought out by the Cleveland Cavaliers, and while he hasn't had a great season so far, I feel like he could be a good addition for this Miami Heat team. Shams himself actually noted the Heat as a potential destination for Kevin Love, so maybe that'll come to fruition, and I think he'd be a great piece fitting there at the 4 for the Heat. Speaking of the Cavs, they faced off against Philly in a game that the Sixers ended up winning. They were up by a lot early on in this game at halftime. I think they were up by over 20 points, but in typical Sixers, or more particularly Doc Rivers-led team fashion, they ended up blowing the lead, and it was really close at the end, but they did end up holding out despite a huge second half effort from Donovan Mitchell. Joel Embiid led the way with 29 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 assists. Hard had a great first half, but in the second half, he kind of cooled off and looked a little bit less aggressive, which I think he should look for his shot a bit more than he did in that second half, finishing with 19 points, 4 rebounds, and 12 dimes. Tyrese Maxey had 16 points off the bench as he continues to play that 6-man role, and Philly, despite almost blowing the lead, does come out of here with a win. Cleveland themselves have been on fire recently, but this is just one that they weren't able to pick up. Like I mentioned, Donovan Mitchell had a really solid game by the end of things. Darius Garland had a good one, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. It just was kind of their overall depth that didn't really end up working out, and like I mentioned, Kevin Love is now bought out by the team, opening up some more opportunities for some other guys, although Kevin Love kind of wasn't playing at this point anyways. Next up, we had Lakers versus Pelicans, which was kind of the first time we have seen this new look Lakers team all assembled together, with Anthony Davis, with LeBron James, with all the new pieces, and they looked really good. This team looked a lot more cohesive than previous iterations of the squad over the past few seasons. Braun had a good game with 21 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 dimes. AD had a 28, 10, and 5 game. D'Lo looked really good alongside them with 21 points and 7 dimes. Malik Beasley hit a couple of threes and provided some really solid spacing. Vanderbilt didn't have the craziest stat line, but his impact was really felt on the game. Bamba did pretty decently as well. Overall, this team just looked a lot better than they have in the past, and I think basically everybody knew that the Lakers got better at the deadline, but actually seeing it in action where they blew out the New Orleans Pelicans, it was impressive. I still don't know exactly how I feel about this Lakers team, whether or not they'll make the playoffs, but I do think they did a good job of upgrading the roster, and seeing it in action just kind of affirms that belief for me beyond the deadline itself on paper. On the Pelican side of things, they continue to kind of struggle without Zion. They did go on a decent win streak recently. They beat my Thunder a couple days ago where Brandon Ingram went off, which he did again in this game. With 25 points, he's kind of seemed to have found his rhythm once again after dealing with a ton of injuries over the course of the season. CJ also had a good game with 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 9 assists, but not too much going on outside of them. They missed Zion pretty badly. They still are a play-in team at the time of me recording this video heading into the All-Star break, but right now they continue to kind of slide down the standings. And finally, I want to comment real quick on the Thunder versus Rockets game. You know I had to talk about my favorite team. OKC heads into the All-Star break 1 game below 500 at 28 and 29. They're sitting solely in the 10th spot, so they are a play-in team at the time of the All-Star break, which I don't think most people, me included, expected to be the case, but due to the great play continuously of Shea, who had 29 points in this game, Jalen Williams, the tall one out of Arkansas, has been great playing the big man position, giving us a lot of physicality and shooting. He had 8 points and 16 rebounds. J-Dub, the smaller Jalen Williams, had 13 points. Josh Giddey had 13 and 6. Darius Saric in his first game as a Thunder had 12 and 5. Overall, been really impressed with the way this team has continued to play over the course of this season, and I'm really hoping that they can make the play-in tournament. And at this point, I feel pretty confident that they will end up making it when it's all said and done, which I think would be some great experience for this young core and a massive success in a season that many people thought was going to be pretty abysmal after the injury of Chet Holmgren. As for the Rockets, they get blown out again for like the millionth time this season. Nobody really stood out in this game beyond probably Jabari Smith Jr., who had a decent performance, but overall it was just an absolute annihilation at the hands of the Thunder, who have kind of gotten their number the past 2 times after the Rockets kind of embarrassed them the first 2 earlier on in the season. But with this loss at the All-Star break, the Rockets are currently on pace to win just 18 games on the season. You haven't seen a lot of growth out of some of their young guys. Jabari Smith hasn't had a great rookie season. Alperen Şengün has easily been the biggest bright spot, but overall not a very promising first half of the season for the young rebuilding Rockets. The good news is they're in great position to potentially land a Victor Wembanyama or a Scoot Henderson, but if you're looking for kind of growth and results, not the greatest start for the Houston Rockets. To wrap things up, I'm going to quickly recap the last few games because most of these were indeed blowouts. The Nuggets destroyed the Mavericks, led by Jeff Green, who had 24 points, and Jokic, who had a triple-double. The Grizzlies held off the short-handed Jazz, who made a huge last-second effort to try and win this game, mainly due to 26-9 from Jaren Jackson Jr. The Celtics blew out the Pistons, led by Jason Tatum, who had 38 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 dimes. The Knicks demolished the Hawks, led by Brunson, who had 28 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists, as he continues to make a potential all-star reserve case. And finally, the Hornets handed the Spurs, I believe, their 13th straight loss, with LaMelo dropping a triple-double. With all that being said, I appreciate you watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. And go ahead and comment down below. Let me know how you feel about your favorite team heading into the All-Star break. I might make a video talking about kind of each team's grades or just my thoughts on each team at this point in the season. If you want to see that, please let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know by liking the video. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you later. Real and Say back.